Let's have a little look in the cantina. So if you've already been to Barolo, you have to realize Barbaresco is a smaller appellation. We are northeast. It includes 3 villages and a little part of Alba. We have an annual production between 3 to 4 million bottles. Not this year, because everyone's sort of down between 25-30%. Not just Piemonte, but most of Italy is down because of that hot summer and dry summer we had. Barolo is southwest. It's 11 villages, making between 13 to 14 million bottles of wine. So basically every year a bottle of Barbaresco is alongside 3.5-4 bottles of Barolo. So Barolo is a much more bigger area. It's much more well known. But I think we've found, and we've definitely noticed that with sales in the US, that the interest in Barbaresco has grown and grown, and people come here and one wine is not challenging the other. They're 2 separate appellations, which usually we find that everything tends to happen here early in Barbaresco than Barolo. So when the grapes start budding in the springtime until when the grapes are being picked in the autumn, we can be sometimes 1 week up to 2 weeks even before Barolo. Actually, I have a friend in Lamora. She's a new up-and-coming star. Her vineyard is very, very high. She finished probably about a week later than a lot of the other Barolo producers. But I mean, yeah, this year everything was a little bit earlier. But that sort of sometimes guarantees that if the weather's a bit more challenging, Barbaresco can sometimes have a little advantage that our job is done, whereas the Barolo producers are waiting not on the sugar for the maturity, but the maturity of the tannins. As you will notice, the Barolo wines have a little bit more of a firmer, stronger tannin to them. Barbaresco is gaining good following because they're wines with a little bit more of an approachability to them when they're young. And to say which wine is better or which wine ages longer, well, they both have good aging capacity. Even the people here change from village to village, so not only the wines. If you've lived here long enough like me, I spent a lot of time traveling the world. I lived in Burgundy in France for a while, and I couldn't get over the fact that every day I'm having a white wine and a red wine that look to be coming from the same looking vineyards but have completely different taste. And I think we've had such a good run of vintages really from the sort of the mid-2000s. We've had a really good string of quality vintages. So that's kind of helped everybody to make progress, to improve. Whereas maybe, you know, back in the day, Papa and Grandpapa had that opportunity every 3 or 4 years. Now we're almost getting it, you know, on a yearly basis. So please don't ask me what's the best vintage, because that's a difficult question to answer. As I say, if we bottled the wine, then it was the best we did that year. So these are the traditional casks. The family de Gresy, like I told you, have been here for a long time, but they were essentially grape growing. And if you go back, even when I came here, there were around about 45 labels of Barbaresco being bottled. Now there are about 130 odd producers of Barbaresco. So it just shows you a lot of the children of the traditional growers are now making, aging and bottling their own wine and putting their own label. Yeah, it's good times to be in this region for receiving tourists, making wine. The quality is there. I would say possibly that in the last 15, 20 years we've learnt more than maybe Papa and Grandpapa learnt in the previous 50 or 60. So things have speeded up, and we've got a greater array of wines to offer. But then sometimes one vintage is more appreciated by one market or one drinker, and then at the same table someone might prefer another bottling or another vintage. So it's personal taste. This was the original stable. The family sold most of the grapes to the co-op in the village, the Produttori of Barbaresco, which is probably one of the oldest co-ops of Italy, and the first to start taking growers' individual plots and age them, bottle them, and then put the name of the cru, like the single vineyard, on the label. So the first time Martinenga is the name of our cru here. It has the distinction of being the largest cru under one ownership. So the French would say it's a monopole. That's about 35 acres. 35 acres around here can be almost the size, the dimension of a wine producer with all their different grapes that they grow. So we've got this, and when we go upstairs you'll get a closer look at this, some part of the vineyard. The first vintage was actually planned to be 1972, and 1972 is one of the worst vintages in history. So my boss had to wait another 12 months before he vinified his first grapes. The original barrels were double the size. We sold them off about 15 to 20 years ago, and we bought in smaller, newer casks. We're also using small French oak on some of the wines as well. So we have a system or a process where we start aging the wines in the small barrels for a year, and then we move them over to these large casks for an extra 12 months. Barbaresco usually is about 24 months total. Barolo requires just that little bit more time because of the structure and the tannins that it has. We are trying to keep the wines back as long as possible, having around 45,000 bottles of various Barbarescos. We in bottle, we're just releasing the 2014, but we've still got plenty of stock of 13. But smaller producers out there, because the interest has grown so much, there's a lot of little Barolo producers that are just selling 13 now. They haven't got any other older vintages, and Barbaresco is selling 14. So we can still offer the marketplace wines with a little bit of age, which is, if we can slow down the release date, then the wine only gets better, and then the people who are purchasing it or reselling it, it's an advantage also for them. The Barbaresco requires 2 years of aging. So from the 1st of January next year, if you'd bottled your 2015, you're allowed to get the DOCG sticker, and they release those from the 1st of January. But really, we're not bottling until the middle of the year, and then we may release one wine a few months later. Or our best wines give them an extra year, or even Camp Gross, our top wine, has almost a year and a half in the bottle before we put it on the market. So barrel and bottle, a minimum of 2 years, and Barolo is 3. If we are keeping the wine in the barrel for a little longer period of time, it usually deserves a little bit more time in the bottle, if we can achieve that, which we are at the moment. But I mean, I've got friends who are bottling the wines, and kind of it has to go on the market quite soon after, because they don't have any wine from the previous year. We do a reserve. Our top wine now is a reserve wine, so that's a total of 5 years total between barrels, the various barrels, and then the time in the bottle. So we're just releasing the 2012, but I thought today I'd show you the 2011, which we still have a little bit of stock of.
100% Nebbiolo, Barbaresco?
For sure, 100%, yes, yeah. I don't think you need to add other ingredients into a good sauce, which is already displaying its quality and its tradition. But I mean, in the old days, blending was an interesting term, because people would not blend grapes; they'd blend vineyards of the same grape, because each parcel would have its own characteristic, and that would make the complete wine. Whereas now, in more modern times, we're able to achieve, a lot of people are keeping all their single plots separately, aging them separately, bottle them separately, and then maybe some plots end up in one market, or some are more approved by another customer. So we're kind of spreading the word a little bit. Plus the fact we cannot really make too much more wine here, because as you've noticed driving around, there's vineyards kind of everywhere. And to buy land, the price of land has jumped up quite a bit. There's a lot of people from outside the area that want to come and make wine here, but the locals are quite protective of the tradition, especially if Papa or Grandpapa are still around. But I mean, to give you an idea, 1 hectare now of Barbaresco would cost you between 800,000 and 1.2 million euros. So, as I say, don't put too much pressure on your kids, because they're the ones who are going to have to be making wine and selling wine in the future marketplace. So,
wow.
But anyway, so far so good. We have the next decade will come, and we'll continue to make good wine.
Barrels, what kind of wood?
So this is the oak from Eastern Europe, so Slavonia, ex-part of Yugoslavia. And really, these barrels are not giving oak character to the wine; they're more like finishing the wine. And these are not really, because the grain in this type of oak is different from the grain in the French barrels, which is a bit more tighter. So oak is an important thing. In the old days, people realized, or didn't realize, that maybe some of the barrels may have had a problem. So there's always those stories that Grandpapa liked barrel number 15 because it gave the wine a special taste, but maybe Grandpapa didn't realize that taste is not... today people get together, they taste wines blind. I probably bought blind tasting here 27 years ago, because the old people didn't understand why I put the local newspaper around a bottle of wine, that they couldn't see what's inside it. So it's a good leveler, and making wine is not only about finding the good things in it, is also being able to recognize where problems may occur, or if problems have occurred. A lot of old barrels, get them out of the winery, because they may have had bacterial spoilage, and every time you put something fresh into it, it'll run the risk of ruining that wine. We saw, like I said, 20 odd years ago, some of the barrels were not doing what we wanted them to do, so that's why we slowly started renewing them. And when they're brand new, because they're not toasted, we tend to put Barbera into them for the first year or two. And that sort of like seasons the barrel for the final aging of the Barbaresco. So, but around here, you're going to be asking, I'm sure, these questions to a lot of people, and you may not always get the same answer because everything's quite personal here. Yeah, yes. They changed the names of the road here a few years ago in GPS sometimes. There's another Strada della Stazione over by Bra. So people are driving there and say, this doesn't look like Barbaresco. So. Okay, we can continue. So the room that you're looking through there now, we normally walk through there, but we're doing some racking today of wines, just to show you. That's what I call it, the engine room. So we do all the alcoholic and malolactic fermentation in these tanks. We still have a lot of the old original cement tanks, which are kind of coming back into fashion a little bit. But essentially we have a system where in these stainless steel tanks, each of them has two pumps, one at the bottom and one we insert inside the tank. And then we do the remontaggio, the pumping over is done automatically. The first reds are Dolcetto, followed by Barbera. Nebbiolo is the last. And even of more recent times, we're getting up to longer time on the skins, so we're doing longer macerations. There's an old system where you close the tank, put in pieces of wood, and you fill it up with the same wine. So those skins remain in contact with the finished wine, so we can macerate them for an extra few days or up to 1 week, 10 days, to take some more color and take some more tannin as well from the... Nebbiolo's biggest challenge in the old days, it had, excuse the French, a hell of a lot of tannin and a hell of a lot of acidity and a lot of fruit, but not always were they so close together in the balance. I think today we're really able to achieve a high quality of Nebbiolo fruit, which when they bring the grapes into the cellar, we can take advantage of that. Progress is important, and I think, as you know, and when your memories from this trip, you'll realize that you've been tasting some pretty nice wines. So spread the good word for us. We can come through. Here you can see some of the composition of the soil. We have a particular type of soil here called a blue-grey marl. It's quite distinctive here in the Barbaresco appellation. We extended the winery back in the early 2000s. We needed a little bit more space, so this warehouse area coming to and the new cellar was built just to make life easier so we don't have to move things too often. You'll see a lot of unlabeled bottles because with all our export markets today, a lot of importers like the name of their company on the back, or Asian markets like things written in their own language to describe the wine or talk about the vintage. So we kind of label to order. USA is about 30-35% of our production. So the other phenomenon is we have quite a few countries around the world that import our wines, and they only deal with Italian wines. So they're like Italian specialists. So the people we work with in America called Della Terra, which is on the back of the brochure. You can take that and have a look at their site. They have about 20 different Italian wineries, and then they offer that package to individual distributors all around your country. So if you we've got a guy in Anchorage, he loves our Barbaresco. He takes a few cases for his best restaurants and probably drinks the rest himself. All sorts of places. I think people think America to sell wine is New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, but there's lots of other cities. And I've had the pleasure to visit your country many times, so I've got to see once you get a positioning somewhere, you kind of never lose it because you start to make a rapport with the distributors and you start to get to know the customers quite personally as well. So I normally go to New Zealand for a bit of a summer break so to say, when it gets colder here in the winter. And I always do a bit of the USA after, so this year I'm going to, well, next year I'll be in San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, which are 3 winemaking areas, but easy places to sell good Italian wine. Come. We're bottling a lot more wines in larger formats now, so we do a lot of magnums. We do like 3 liters. We do a few 5 liters. So the larger the bottle, usually the better aging capacity that it has, especially with these good vintages we've been having. So we just left these areas open. Yeah, that just shows you the composition of the soil, because there's usually in every group there's someone who's a bit of a soil nut. So once you go and touch it and smell it, and I'll tell you what it tastes like in the glass. Okay. We have some wines that are not aged in barrel, like the Dolcetto and the young Nebbiolo, which I'll show you. I believe stainless steel sometimes is a little bit sort of, it doesn't let the wine do anything, so to speak.
It kind of keeps it neutral.
Yeah. But I mean, even when we bring the wines out of barrel after 2 years or 2.5 years, they might sit in concrete for like 4 or 5 months before we.
From the concrete, would that have any effect on it?
The which?
The mineral of the concrete?
Well, they're actually, they've got linings.
Sealed?
Yes, they're sealed, yeah. But I mean, now you may have seen the wineries where they have these concrete eggs and things like that. There's like the amphora under the ground, those sort of things. That's having a bit of a return. You know, in the wine industry, it's like being in a kitchen. You've all got your own pot and fry pan. But maybe I'm coming to cook in your kitchen. That it might take me a few dinners to get used to your knives and everyone's got their own tools, so it's quite. So during the rest of the year, we have the bottling machine here. Obviously, the wine press has finished its job for another 12 months or 10 months, whatever. So we'll move that away shortly. But I mean, we just got a lot more space here now to age the smaller volumes of wine we have. We do also do a Chardonnay in the barrel as well. So that's 2017 in that one. The stone walls were designed that allows a little bit of moisture to come through, so we have a nice natural temperature and humidity in this room. Underneath the barrels we've got stones and then the natural earth. So this has been done as naturally as possible, and we have a system we can generate in the air over a little bit, and then on top you'll see when we go upstairs we've got a big garden on top of here.
Below grade level?
We went into the hill.
Okay.
So the original vineyard, we lost some of it unfortunately, but we needed the space. Not just for here, but all what I just showed you before. So, this is all French oak. We do not use 100% oak, new oak in the wines. We use a percentage between 25 to 30%. So it's just enough to sort of give some character to the wine, but above all, help the color of Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo is one of its biggest problems in the old days. Was it was a young wine, but it had an old-looking color. So we were able to stabilize and fix that color. It's kind of funny. I've been in the world of wine for more than half my life, and in the old days, if it was a red wine, it had to be dark, it had to be concentrated, it had to be rich, thick. Now people are looking for other types of wine, more elegance, more refinement. And funnily enough, there's a lot of interesting grapes around the world that are not dark in color, but they can do the business in the bottle, in the glass, at the table. We know why Nero d'Avola is called Nero d'Avola, because it's Nero. That makes sense. So, the stability, the look of the wines is better today compared with the old days, in my opinion. So around Italy, there are zones like where a host is from Puglia. They make a lot of rosé down there. And I was down there at the end of July, and it was like 40 degrees, which for you is about 110. Yeah. And we were drinking more rosé than Primitivo because it made sense. So we're going to take the lift up. It takes about 4 or 5 at a time. This was done when we did the new winery downstairs, so it was kind of added on that in the old days, because the room downstairs is nice, but once you've got larger groups, well, sometimes we'd have to go to a restaurant. Now we take a chef and he comes to cook for us.